nobody ever talks about how most promiscuous men are the most morally bankrupt people? For some reason, we all just gloss over all of the men who regularly engage in deceitful, low integrity, morally bankrupt behavior in order to gain access to sex from women. See, male promiscuity is seen as some kind of badge of honor instead of the low self-esteem that it is. Men will literally sit around bragging about sexual promiscuity and then openly retelling stories of all the shady things that they have done in order to achieve a conquest. And nobody says anything about it. Now, I'm not going to lie. Do I think that every man who has casual sex does it in a dishonest way? Of course not. That goes without saying. However, a lot of them do. And we all know that they do. But we all sit around listening to men telling stories of how they lied, manipulated, used covert contracts, misrepresented their intentions, took advantage of somebody's vulnerability, or exploited somebody's low boundary in order to prey on them and to get sex out of them. So let's all not sit around pretending like you don't know what I'm talking about. Of course, nobody ever says it like that though, right? Because like I said in previous videos, people are cowards. And people hate accountability and they will not own up to their own bad behavior. Instead, what I've noticed is that a lot of promiscuous men like to use a lot of euphemisms. They like to call themselves players. They like to talk about how they played her before she played me. And they like to refer to how they never technically agreed to be exclusive or how women never technically asked if he was seeing another woman. And they like to blame their behavior on being drunk. They like to blame the women that they sleep with for being loose or easy. And somehow that is justification for using another person. These kinds of men like to talk in circles and they like to say things like, let's see where this goes, or I'm just dating around, or I don't know what I want right now, to avoid having to admit directly that they are just looking for sex. See, I could at least respect you if you said what your intentions were outright, but promiscuous men almost never do that. I have personally witnessed promiscuous men try to make light of really shady situations in which they used women, took advantage of women, or in a lot of cases, flat out lied to women's faces and told her he wanted a relationship with her in order to sleep with her and then ghost her. And for some reason, we all sit around pretending like that is not the reality of promiscuity, hookup culture, and casual sex. Now, casual sex and hookup culture do not appeal to me. I've said that in previous videos. I've never participated in it and I will never participate in it. However, I objectively don't have a problem with two consenting adults having casual sex. As long as there is honesty and integrity, fully grown adults can do whatever they want. It's not my business. My only problem with casual sex, hookup culture, and promiscuity is that women are often victims of it because people rarely tell the truth and they rarely move with integrity in these situations. Now, if you made it this far in the video, you're probably thinking, but Cosmic Nebula, why aren't you criticizing women for doing the same thing to men? And the reason is simple. Women don't have to lie, cheat, or manipulate in order to get casual sex. A woman could walk into a room and make an offer of a one-night stand and have most of the men in that room willingly take her up on it. Now, I'm not saying that women don't lie for sex. I'm sure that it happens. But more often than not, women have no real need in order to lie because men will easily offer themselves up for casual sex. That's just reality. I don't make reality. I just live in it. I have heard about and read so many stories of women talking about how a man buttered her up, slept with her, and then ghosted her. How a man feigned being interested in a relationship with her and then slept with her and ghosted her. Or women talking about how men immediately lose interest in them after they sleep with each other. Now, some people like to call this post-nut clarity, which is just another euphemism to explain away using another person for your own sexual gratification. Because, like I said, people are cowards and they will never directly take responsibility for their behavior. Women will talk about how they were in a low and vulnerable place in their life, and some random man in their general vicinity showed up in order to take advantage of that. Women with low boundaries and weak will being pressured into sex by men or made to feel like they can't say no, or else the man will revoke his attention or feelings for them. And the list goes on and on and on. Because nobody ever talks about how promiscuous men are often predatory as fuck. And nobody talks about it, even though we all know that it happens. I've heard plenty of stories from the horse's mouth about how low men are willing to stoop for sexual validation from women. But two of these stories stand out and they live rent-free in my mind to this day. And I warn you, don't watch this video if you don't like situations of ill-gotten sexual consent or blurry lines of consent. So, the first story happened a few years ago. I stumbled across a video posted somewhere online. I can't remember. Anyway, the video was recorded by some young dude, maybe 19 or 20 years old, on his smartphone. And he had uploaded it to, I think, Facebook or Instagram Live. So he had uploaded this video to his social media asking for his friends to come and rescue him because some crazy girl was trying to force him to impregnate her. Now, in the background of this video, you can hear a young woman around the same age as him screaming, get me pregnant, I want a baby." Now, up until this point of the story, you might think, wait, but this man is the victim, right? But as he continues to move around the room trying to get out, the woman in the background comes more into focus. From the way she looks to the way that she speaks, it is clear that she has some form of intellectual and or physical disability. So I'm sure everybody has come in contact with an adult like that with some kind of mental deficiency where they likely live with a full-time caregiver in order to help them make decisions about their daily lives. So this woman, she was speaking in a very childlike voice and with childlike mannerisms. And then it becomes pretty clear that the man in this video does not have any sort of intellectual disability whatsoever. And yet, he was there trying to have sex with this girl who I doubt was intellectually able to fully consent to sex. And his friends were all in the comment section laughing at him and making fun of him for sleeping with the retarded girl. So that means that they are all aware of this girl's vulnerabilities, and that didn't stop him from going over to her house. This dude was at her house trying to secretly have sex with her because he was aware of her mental deficiencies and inability to make sound decisions. She kept telling him that she wanted a baby, and he kept refusing. And so she started to block the door, right? Because to somebody like her, a baby is like a doll. She does not fully understand the gravity of pregnancy or becoming a mother because she does not possess the mental faculties too. And he knows that. But what stood out most to me about the video is the sheer lack of empathy on his part and the flagrant attempt at taking advantage of a girl who he knew didn't have the mental capability to fully consent. He went there for the express purpose of exploiting her vulnerability. And in the video, he kept calling her crazy. And he kept making fun of her behavior. And he kept acting like what she was doing was abnormal. He was there making fun of her, when the reality is that she is less accountable for her action because she does not possess the cognitive ability to be accountable like you and I do. And he was doing all of this for what? For sex. He had no qualms about it. How fucking disgusting is that? For you to go over and try to have sex with a girl that you know has a low IQ and has no ability to fully understand or take responsibility for the consequences of sex. But you don't care as long as you get sexual gratification from it. I will never be able to understand the mindset of a person that is capable of something like that. And that situation makes my blood boil even to this day. Now, I have one more story. And like I said, skip over this story if you dislike ill-gotten consent and blurry lines. Do not say that I did not warn you. So I was about 20 years old when I was personally told this story, literally from the horse's mouth. So I was working a job in college and my male coworker told me this story Well, he bragged about this story to me. So this dude used to always tell me all of these stories about his sexual conquests when he was in the military. Because as you know, promiscuous men fundamentally have low self-esteem, which is why they need to get validation from sleeping around and then going around telling those stories to other people. Anyway, in this story, he told me about how he was at a college party back when he was enlisted. Now, at this time, he was about 24 or 25. He was at a college party, and it was a sorority or a fraternity party. I can't remember. So at the time, it had been rush week. And so you know how that whole scene is. A bunch of irresponsible college students engaging in morally bankrupt behavior under the guise of having fun. There was some hazing going on. And so if you wanted to get into the sorority, you had to go through this hazing. So the head girl of the sorority made a rule that all of the new girls had to have sex with a dude in order to gain acceptance into the sorority. So then he goes on to tell me how he had sex with 8 girls in a row on the same night. And then he goes on to explain to me in detail how nervous and uncomfortable all of these girls were and how he was pretty sure he took a couple of virginities that night. And he said this story with the most smug look of self-satisfaction on his fucking face. Imagine agreeing to have sex with 8 girls who you know are being pressured into it and then seeing nothing wrong with that. Now, people who lack integrity would listen to this story and say, well, Cosmic Nebula, they were all over the age of 18 and they could have said no. And you're right. They could have said no. But I want you to just imagine the setting. Being away from home for the first time, being given alcohol for the first time, being in an environment where you are pressured to be the cool girl because everybody else is doing it, and then not wanting to be excluded or kicked out for refusing to go along. So no, it's not just a matter of saying no and walking away. That's social suicide for an impressionable 18-year-old taking their first steps into adulthood. 18-year-olds, despite being technically legal adults, are often quite immature and quite vulnerable and easy to exploit, which is why a lot of older men and women prey on them for sex and relationships. And this dude had no qualms about having sex with 8 girls who were peer pressured into it. He had no problem having sex with girls who he could see were nervous and who had possibly never had sex before. He had no objection to it, because his ego stood to benefit from it. And who gives a fuck if they felt bad afterward because they didn't technically say no, right? And that's my problem with males' promiscuity. It's all the lying. It's the manipulation. It's the exploitation. But most importantly, it's the refusal to own up to it. If you're going to be morally bankrupt and a piece of shit, go ahead. But at least own up to it. Don't be a coward. That is all that I ask. But in my experience, almost nobody does. No one ever shines a light on it either. And what I've always found interesting is how uncomfortable promiscuous men get when you refuse to allow them to downplay their behavior and weasel out of it. They get real uncomfortable when you refuse to allow them to hide behind jokes and euphemisms. And they get really defensive when you acknowledge their behavior for what it is. Like I said, if you are going to do some shady, low-integrity shit, own up to it and call it what it is. Don't be a fucking coward. But what promiscuous men do is they start trying to shame you. They justify their behavior by saying, well, other people do it, or it's not my responsibility to tell women the truth. Because fuck integrity and fuck basic human decency, right? People these days go on and on about how terrible everything and everybody is. Everybody wants to benefit from a society that prioritizes integrity, but nobody wants to actually have integrity. Make that make sense.